Special meeting is called to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Again. Colleagues, moving on to the approval of tonight's agenda. Unless there are objections, tonight's agenda will be approved as printed. Okay. Very good. We'll now move on to public comment. Is there anyone who would like to address the board this evening? Okay. Excellent. Thank you so much. So please note, before we begin our interviews tonight, that members of the audience who wish to provide feedback may complete an interview feedback form following each interview, and we encourage you please to do that. After completion, they will be distributed to all board members. And again, thank you for being here and participating in this really important process. We appreciate that. We're now going to welcome our first candidate here to Crary tonight, and Mr. Matt Wandrie. And Mr. Bennett, our MASB facilitator, will bring Mr. Wandrie in.
Okay.
Hi, Mr. Wandrie.
Everyone, how we doing?
Good. Welcome.
Good. Thank you.
How you doing?
Very well. How are you?
Great. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. So, we have had the opportunity to review your resume, as you know. If you don't mind, if you please tell us what specifically interests you in the Waterford superintendency, and how your background and experiences make you a good fit to be our next superintendent.
Well, firstly, thank you for selecting me to be a candidate for interview. I really appreciate the opportunity. I actually began my administrative career here in Waterford a little over 20 years ago as the assistant principal and athletic director at Waterford Kettering High School. Was able to switch over to the principalship at Mott for 3 years, and in that 6-year period, looking back on it with great affection, it's almost, I really cut my teeth here as an administrator. Learned in many ways to some of the characteristics of my current leadership role and as a superintendent. It really began here in Waterford. There's a lot of opportunities in the state of Michigan, not just for prospective superintendents and districts, as the turnover is considerable, but in administrative positions writ large. And for those of us that have been in a position long term, like myself, those opportunities are frequently presented to us. And you have to discern professionally, personally, if those opportunities make sense for you at a particular time. Several of those have come my way in the recent, I would say, last 12 to 18 months, none of which I pursued until this opportunity became available. I don't want to overstate it for fear of sounding overly anxious, but I love Waterford. And it was a very special place to me and my family. And I'm currently in my 14th year as superintendent in Lapeer Schools. Prior to that, time as a human resource director with the Dearborn Schools, principal, teacher, athletic director, assistant principal. And just ready at this point in my career with probably 6 to 10 years remaining, depending on how things go. Where I would love to finish up here in Waterford and bring the skills that began in Waterford, but have been honed in the interim, and hopefully can benefit the staff and students and community here.
Thank you. I'm now going to turn it over to our Vice President, Kristen Wagner, for the next question.
Could you please share an example of a time you have led a sustained multi-year improvement initiative, such as a strategic plan? Be specific specific regarding the situation, the task at hand, your specific role, and the outcome.
So in my first year as the superintendent of Lapeer, I want to say it was my first board meeting. During public comment, a gentleman came to the podium and said, we hear you're that guy that's going to come here and close a high school, and that's never going to happen in Lapeer. And I said, that's fine. I haven't looked at one piece of data yet. I have no idea if that is going to be a potential outcome, and we'll see. And it was telling, but that process, we did eventually merge our high schools, was a uniqueness that when completed, it was hard to look back on it, and now that it's 11 years in the rearview mirror, hard not to look on it with considerable pride. Anytime you have a high school that has, a town that has multiple high schools, there are allegiances that develop over time. There are staff, environments, culture that really solidify, not just at those two buildings, but in the community, their feeder middle schools, elementary schools, and the like. And the thought of telling a portion of the community that the building that you identify with will no longer be what you have grown accustomed to can be a deficit model approach, meaning it's a zero-sum game. Some win, some lose. And I think my team and I realized that if we were to make this a success, we had to look at it from what I called more of a profit approach. How are we going to gain from this? So it started with some real active listening. We have a process, and this is not unique to Lapeer. Many organizations do this. The acronym is SWOT, where you identify an organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So I was able to meet with a series of both staff-based teams, alumni associations, business leaders, student groups, parents, teachers, secretaries, board, you name it. We met with probably 40 different groups, and we conducted that process over the course of several weeks. What's great about Lapeer, what works, where are our current weaknesses, but where do we have opportunity in the weeds somewhere, and what are the current threats to the success of our district overall? And after a while, you begin to get into some very organic conversations with people. And it's also a way to field test some ideas that you, the administration, or the board are considering with those organizations or with those various groups. And it was really funny. You get to learn the flavor of a community by just simply interacting with them and having real conversations. And I'll never forget, I met with the secretary group, and it was probably a group of about 50 women. And this one woman raises her hand, and she prefaces her comments when I asked her what the district's strengths were. She said, well, I've only been here for 30 years, so I'm not sure I'm qualified to speak on this. And what was funny about it is that everyone was glaring at her because she was the new girl. Like if you're not in Lapeer for 6 generations, you're not allowed to opine on what direction the district should go. So I kind of laughingly said, only 30 years. She goes, yeah, well, I'm still learning the ropes. And it really struck me funny that level of kind of generational connection to the schools was real, and the challenge of presenting this entire community with whatever the outcome was going to be. At that time I didn't know it. We were still in the kind of collecting of information phase. But ultimately we did our homework. We actually spent several days in the Bloomfield Hills School District. I was very fortunate to work with the superintendent at the time, Dr. Glass, who had been through their high school merger process, and he made his entire administrative team available to our team to basically tell us what not to do. These are the things you need to avoid. Their process was very long. It took them almost 10 years to merge Andover and Lasser. So we learned from the mistakes of others, and Dr. Glass was humble in sharing that information, both good and bad, with us, but that helped us make some really good intentional decisions along the way. I really believe that charting the course for something better, optimism is a force multiplier. We were optimistic about the future of Lapeer. We realized that we couldn't simply close a building and move kids into another one, that we had to reimagine the entire district. So I'll wrap up because I know we've got several questions to get to, but just the end result is kind of what I want to focus on. That really is the centerpiece of my leadership, is what do the results tell us, as opposed to what great ideas might we field test here. I think the results matter. from 18 months of announcement of the merger to opening of the brand new high school, we got it done. It was an 18-month process. We created and we reimagined one of the former high schools as the Center for Innovation that included multiple additional academic and extracurricular opportunities for kids. So we figured out how to make both buildings viable centerpieces to the new plan. It wasn't, you guys are losing your experience and you've got to trade it for this one. So any sort of significant organizational shift requires just multitude of responses, and so we really got to the point of diving into that work, and I'm very proud of what emerged as a result.
Thank you so much. Treasurer Dunn?
I do apologize, I forgot to use the microphone. So, for our listening public, I apologize.
Do I have to start over, or
No.
is that you're good?
No. You're good.
As our superintendent, how would you work to ensure and enhance the sustainability and reputation of our district?
This is a great question. I really believe that, first things first, a belief in Waterford's capacity to achieve, winning for Waterford. And that starts at the top. It starts with the board, it starts with the superintendent, and the trickle-down effect of the impact of an enthusiasm and a true collective efficacy that exists between the board team, the central office leadership team, certainly the superintendent. And I can only say that, and you can only use the examples with which you're familiar. And starting in Lapeer was a very difficult undertaking. The district had fallen on really hard times financially. There was, some lackluster direction and taking over at a time when folks were ready to have difficult conversations. And there is a science to leading organizations and communities through difficult conversations. I don't think it's a mystery or it's in the secret sauce. I think that if you put the work in, you certainly can do that. So in conversation with probably 30 to 40 people here in Waterford, just in preparation for this interview, there is a real collective belief that Waterford's best days are ahead of it. And when you decide to interview for a job or decide to apply for something, it's a two-way street, right? You have to say yes to the eventual candidate, and that candidate has to say yes to the district. And those conversations, as I had them over the course of the last several weeks, have really fortified my decision to come here. And I think, firstly, sustainability, you have to identify what separates Waterford, and if it doesn't exist, what can. So what are the special and unique things, whether it's programs, facilities, staff, things that set us apart? How is the district positioned to go from good to great? What are so you build on foundational things that are good. I think a lot of leaders, whether it's educationally speaking or in the private sector, upon hire think, well, they hired me because I'm the person with all the answers, and I'm supposed to come in here and just tell everyone what I think and give my opinion and just drag everybody through, this great change. And that is, I think, a gigantic mistake. I think that a good leader is someone that builds consensus with the best data available. There's a difference between having an opinion and making a decision. I've got lots of opinions, right? We all do. And there's also there's no canned one-size-fits-all answer. Just because something worked in Lapeer or Dearborn or heck, even in Waterford when I was here before, doesn't make it true in 2024. It just doesn't. There are different variables at play, a multitude of factors that have to be considered. So enhancing what you do well, I think, is the first step to sustainability. Believing that you can achieve, believing that you can be great, and saying it. Not being afraid to say, this is a great place, we have a great staff, we've got great parent support, we've got great kids. If you think it and say it and believe it, it can come true, right? I believe in speaking those things into the universe and making them happen. Then identify future innovations that are going to be that force multiplier, that are going to be distinct and set you apart. Oftentimes, we we tend to, especially if we've been in a community long term, tend to look backwards and say, it was great then. And there's, I think, something in the, kind of the human psyche that in all of us, we tend to look back and think that how we did something or how it was when we were going through was just better. And in some cases, that's true. But it's never going to be that way again, how you remember it. So from a community perspective, in terms of the vision, the reputation of the district, and the sustainability of that vision, it starts with the belief that it's actually possible, and then you can chart a course with people alongside you, not me at the front with the microphone browbeating everybody that this is the answer and convincing them. It's collecting information and data from them, codifying that into an actual plan, and then being transparent about what the outcomes and the goals are of that belief. So whether it's additional advanced placement courses, CTE, facilities, individualized learning for students, whatever we decide, whatever that we come up with is what separates us and distinguishes us from our competitor, because that's what we're dealing with. We're in a competitive landscape now for kids. We all get behind it, and we can then build a mission and a vision behind that.
We're going to turn it over now to Secretary Torres.
Tell us. Okay. All right. So tell us about a challenge you've experienced in bringing a diverse group of people to consensus on a difficult issue. How did you provide leadership, and what was the outcome?
I can think of two really significant examples in my career that I look back on with great pride. One was when I was the HR director in Dearborn Schools. We eventually arrived at one of the state's first voluntary employee benefit associations. And essentially what that means is, in concert with the teacher union leadership, as the HR director, we were in the midst of negotiating a teacher contract. And it was really at the kind of the beginning stages of a lot of changes relative to healthcare and benefits in the public sector at that time. And costs were really becoming deep concerns for districts, because the increases were getting to the point where we're really starting to negotiate some difficult contracts here. So she and I sat down, and it was her idea. It was her idea that Matt, we had 2,500 employees, 1,500 of which were professional staff. So it was a very large undertaking, but it was a group size large enough to take to individual carriers with some legitimate utilization data and say, we have the capacity to kind of self-insure, so to speak. I was very interested, as was my superintendent, in getting out of the healthcare business altogether, and as opposed to working with the carriers and presenting plans to the staff, they had every intention of owning that themselves, becoming their own association, and to this day, that plan sustains. So basically what the Dearborn teachers have is the ability to shop their own insurance. They manage it themselves. The district covers whatever the hard cap cost is, and that changes on an annual basis, or whatever they select relative to the cap. And the employees are responsible for their own utilization. So talk about accountability, right, from the perspective of encouraging the employees to make smart healthcare decisions, and maybe some options that are a bit more economical to keep those costs down. It's now on the employees, not the district. So really a very innovative at the time for public schools, public sector, and very proud that still persists. The second is less technical when you're, but and a little more fun. I led in concert with my team, the school district through the high school merger in Lapeer. The hardest part of which was determining what the new high school mascot was going to be. This was a blind spot for me. I thought that people would be really interested in the curriculum, the offerings for kids, how we're going to manage the schedule, getting kids to and fro. We did institute a campus approach to learning. So we had, our high schools were east and west. We closed the west campus. East became the new Lapeer High, but west was and is still a centerpiece of the school district's academic offerings. So we were shuttling kids there for capstone courses in English, robotics classes, PLTW courses, and it was still a usable facility. It's also the home to the district athletic campus. But the mascot got people really fired up. And as a former athlete, athletic director, I was there for it. And so what we decided to do was, I know there's a question about discerning whether or not a decision is mine solely or when to incorporate the opinion and advice of others. This was certainly a decision there's no way in heck I was going to make on my own. So we got the students together. I got 60 students from each high school, high-profile coaches from each school, the band director, teachers, prominent parents and booster groups, the drama moms and dads, a very wide variety, former coaches, retired alumni living in the community, a couple hundred people in the auditorium. And we first started with kind of a basic education with the kids about marketing. Just what does branding mean? What does this actually look like? What does a name, what does a brand tell you about an organization? And long story short, I won't belabor it, we met 4 or 5 times. We tasked the kids with individually talking to between 50 and 100 people in the community to solicit their input. All total, we documented over 5,000 community members were touched by one of those students in some sort of face-to-face survey or Facebook message or communication of some kind. When they came back, I've never been a part of a group that size, that diverse, that came up with an overwhelmingly same opinion about something. And we eventually became the Lapeer Lightning. I didn't like it. It works now. It's great. Everyone loves the alliteration. But the kids really drove that. And when we were criticized for it publicly, just mildly at first, I was very happy to stand up and say, well, the students who this is going to impact and the people who it's going to impact the most are the ones that made the decision, and we, the adults who manage this organization, should probably support them. And here's the process they went through to arrive at the decision. And it has been, by all accounts, wildly successful. I wanted Lancers, by the way. Don't ask why, but it didn't go over.
We're now going to turn it over to Trustee Joslin.
How do you maintain visibility and accessibility for staff, parents, and community groups?
When I first read this question, I was going to just say, you just do it, and then move on to the next question, but I thought better of that really curt answer. I think this is something that you just do. I really believe that. For me personally, I calendar building visits every single week into my calendar. There is not a week that goes by, and there hasn't been in the last 13 and a half years, that I have not been in our buildings. And I do the same for our central office leadership team. So my HR director, our business staff, finance director, assistant superintendents, obviously our curriculum people they're more in buildings, I think, just organically, but they're in our buildings and they're in our classrooms, because every single thing we do is about what happens in the 4 walls of that classroom. How can you run a district budget of $50, $60, $80, $120 million that claims to design an academic program and everything else we do in schools and have no firsthand knowledge or consistent firsthand knowledge of what's happening in the most important 1,000 square feet in the district? You can't do it from your office. So I place a premium on accountability, meaning it's an expectation of being a central office administrator in Lapeer schools that you are regularly in the building, and they're held to that standard. But beyond that, it is really grown into an organic function of who we are and what we do. We have a process called instructional rounds that we do on an annual basis, really kind of stolen from the medical field, whereby every single district administrator and building principal and administrator travels to every single building every year and does an intentional walkthrough of classrooms there's a debrief and a sharing out of the strengths and weaknesses of what we saw as an administrative team in those buildings. Those building staffs do the exact same thing in their own building, and then we compare notes. And we build our district goals and the next year's professional development and things off of those instructional rounds. So seeing administrators, central office administrators, at district events in the buildings is not a rarity in Lapeer. It just simply isn't. We have as many meetings that require principal participation in the actual buildings themselves when at all possible. It's another cheap reason to get out of your office and get into a building. We try not to drag folks over to central office, and there are times where that can't be possible, but that's certainly part of it. Regular and frequent attendance at student performances, student events, community events. I just think this is a baseline expectation. I just don't know how, as a superintendent, you can't be a part of that. I was fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, to attend with my wife our homecoming football game this past Friday, and we got to help correct some student behavior. We were fortunate enough to fall upon some kids doing some not so good things and deal with the issue. And the point is, one of the kids, he knew who I was. It wasn't like, who are you? And but that's just, we're all there. We're all part of it. Our high school administration is not the sole team that's responsible for running a Friday night football game. We have elementary administrators that are required to be there. We have middle school administration, central office administration. This is a team effort. No job too big, no job too small. We're all part of it. As far as the community is concerned, there's no substitute for involvement. I'm a member in Lapeer County of our Rotary. I'm a former president of that organization, the Scholarship and Loan Fund, the Child Advocacy Center, the United Way, and a District Parent Advisory Council. So I am interacting with business leaders, philanthropic leaders, and our parents on a weekly basis. I'm a firm believer that legitimate community involvement is not limited to the boardroom. If you want to get to people, you can say we're having a meeting at the board office and be there, and that's where all the information is going to be, and that's legitimate and that's fine. But we have found that going to the apartment complexes in the main lobbies, going to the community centers of our trailer parks, going to the golf course and speaking to our golf course communities in the dining hall areas, going to the public library, going to local businesses large enough to host community events. That's where you find people. And if you want a different answer than the one you get from the diehards who come to everything that the school district hosts, that's how you do it. And so I always use the phrase legitimate community and legitimate parent involvement, because I feel like we've accomplished that in Lapeer, and it's something I'm very proud of and would certainly hope to continue here. The last thing I'll say about this is when people in the community see you putting in that kind of work and coming to them, the capacity to build and maintain relationships is enhanced considerably, because they recognize that you're not just sitting behind the podium or saying, and I've had this happen in my own district where, someone will come up for public comment, they want to engage the board, they want to engage the leadership, and we know that we can't go off script and start, an exchange back and forth. So what I'll tell those people is, it sounds like we have enough folks in the audience that are concerned about this. We need a community forum for this. So the next week, we'll have a community forum where I can have the microphone, or whomever the concern is with can take the mic, step aside from the board table, and have a legit interaction back and forth with people. And I think they really appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wandrie. And turn it over to Trustee Petrucia.
Share an experience that illustrates your commitment and capacity to providing an inclusive and responsive environment for all students and staff, while also ensuring a transparent decision-making process.
Yeah, lots of big words in there, and important ones, but it's okay. That's okay. Sounds like you've got some folks over there that can maybe help you out. So when we evaluated the report that was submitted following the shooting in Oxford, which is obviously a very deeply personal event that happened to Lapeer because they're immediate to our southern border. So a lot of our staff, a lot of our first response community, and a lot of folks in Lapeer were impacted by that event. We had to take a really long, hard look at our district crisis response team. And what really came to the forefront for me, which again, I use the word blind spot a lot because I like to think of myself as someone that gets it and can see problems before they emerge. This one really got me though. Our special needs students in the district, and it's kind of hard to see what the parallel or connection could be here, were really underserved by our crisis response. And what I mean to say is we had several events that happened before the shooting, and they were significant, and we went through the protocols of response. One of the things that we absolutely ignored was the debriefing with the kids about what happened. And there was a cumulative effect of all these things that happened that they weren't being able to process with an adult at school to tell them everything was going to be okay. And so as we were reading the report, every single person on the crisis response team, every board member, every central office team member, every principal read that report, and we came back together to say, okay, how does this inform our practice and what can we do better to improve it? And the first thing we did was add an entire slew of mental health support staff members to our district crisis response team to help us manage that component of it. Right? We had ALICE training, we had great communication tools, we had great immediate response to crisis. Everyone had very detailed and outlined and well-articulated job responsibilities. But the one thing we really fell down at was, how does this impact staff and students? How are they feeling about these issues? So that has really enhanced our district's response to crisis. Obviously, all of that comes replete with board policy updates, and the board was very engaged in that process as well. And we actually put our board through some of the same training that our staff went through, so they were very familiar with, and many of our board participated actively in all the different trainings that we brought to the district as a result of that kind of, I think, just a reevaluation. So, from a transparency perspective, the second part of that question, I just honestly believe that the two most important things with district leadership, whether it be board or superintendent, with any community, the two most important words to me are humility and honesty. Humility is saying things like, we don't do everything right all the time, we make mistakes, we ask for your grace and patience and working with us and your input to get through those, but also being honest about where we're at with any particular thing. Like, hey, we're not happy with student achievement right now, and this is what we think we need to do. Where do you think as parents you can fit in and help us with that? Or our crisis response team was deficient in these areas, but we're working to improvement and we need your feedback, so let us know how we're doing. We do a lot of surveys. I survey everything from every single teacher after the day they take professional development to see if they liked it, see if they got anything out of it. Would they go to it again if they had to do it on their own? To guide our decisions. And the same is true with parents. How do you think we're doing? The same is true with kids. I went into classrooms and met with kids face to face. How do you think we're doing? And when they said we were doing really poorly in certain areas, well, those are the kids. So you can't say, well, what you don't understand is, building board policy is a highly complex process, and you're just kids, and you probably don't understand, how all that goes into that. And when you're parents someday, you'll get it. You can say all those things, or you can look at a 17-year-old who says, I think it sucks, and here's why, and be responsive to that and build it into a plan. And so that transparency of people will hear bad news, people will give you grace, people will work with you if they don't feel like you're trying to give them the canned, I'm the smartest guy in the room answer all the time.
Trustee Sutherland.
Thank you. How do you decide when it's appropriate to involve others, such as teachers, other administrators, students, parents, or the board, in your decision-making process?
Thank you for that question. I honestly believe, and I could make the argument that all decision-making is situational, but I would also have to admit that I don't think I've ever made a single decision by myself. I just don't know how anyone does that. certainly maybe in an extreme emergency situation that literally calls for an immediate reaction, but I really can't say as if I've ever experienced that. Maybe as a father I have, when a kid runs into the road, you make a decision to grab them. You don't have to get a committee together to do that. But as a superintendent, even in situations where it is, and unfortunately, these things are becoming a reality for management of school districts, whether it's a suspected weapon that's in the building and you have to manage a response to that, or there's 2 ambulances going to the school because kids overdosed using a vape, which happened to us. There's a difference between what I would call like delegated authority, like that is the principal's decision to make. Perfect example, we were at the Friday night football game, we had some real issues at the gate with reentry and kids just coming in and out, and it was kind of a hairy situation. The principal was there next to me. I said, this can't happen anymore. He emails me today, he says, hey, I'm getting a group of people together to address this for next Friday. We've got a big home game. Do you want to be a part of that decision? I said, nope, that is you, the AD, the coaches, the staff, you got it. He gave me a great debrief after that, but that is not my decision to make. That is a delegated decision to him. I trust him, I hired him. If I wanted to make all the decisions, I would save us a lot of money, get rid of him, and go there and run the high school. Last year, we had a suspected weapon in the building. It was a different high school principal. This gentleman I was referring to earlier is our first year here with us. The gentleman prior was there for 10 years, and I went to the building along with several other central office staff members, and I walked in, and the first thing he said to me is, are you here to be in charge? I said, absolutely not. I'm here to support you doing this is your building, these are your kids, this is your staff. And so I think our people appreciate the fact that I know what decisions are mine to make as a superintendent. I'm not afraid to make them. I'm not afraid to get the answer and be decisive about it. But at the same time, I'm not going to undercut and undermine people in the district because of my positional authority. Everyone knows the superintendent is the boss. And if the boss wants to make all the decisions, the boss can make all the decisions. That cripples an organization's growth. If middle management and folks that are beneath you on the organizational chart just know that you're going to come in and make the decision anyway, they become, what's the fancy way of saying this, less good at it. They don't build the capacity in themselves to feel like you support them in their decisions. Now, that doesn't come with free reign. Well, you're the principal, this is a building level issue and you can do whatever you want. Nope, I'm still the superintendent. If the decision was poor and there's accountability and we have a discussion about it to grow you to make a better one next time, that's my role as that kind of coach, right, leader. But if it's not a delegated authority, then they have to, then I'll step in and do that. Leadership is about thought leadership as much as it is about personnel, right? So my job largely as a superintendent is to set a course, to set an expectation, and set the metrics by which it will be measured, and then to support the folks who we've hired to do that job. And then be a guidepost for them if things go left or right and we need to get recentered to make sure we're maintaining a focus on the direction. There are formal ways to communicate and make decisions, whether it's your district parent advisory council, the board, committee meetings, all those things. But once the decision is made, to decisively support it and move on. And that's, I think, what a good superintendent has the capacity to do.
Thank you, Mr. Wandrie. So considering your past accomplishments, what are some of the reasons for your success? How have you overcome the difficulties you may have encountered?
I think 4 words really come to mind. Faith, family, exercise, and fun. I'll start with my faith. It's a very important part of who I am. Won't get into a whole lot about that, but I'm just a very small person in this big universe, and really dependent on more divine intervention. My family, my wife is here with me today. Being a superintendent it's a taxing thing. It's taxing for your spouse, for your family. It's not a 9-to-5 gig. It's 24/7, 365. My wife loves the 3 a.m. snow day phone calls. She's excited to be a part of the decision-making process. which includes kicking me out of bed to make sure I have that conversation in a different room. But in the early part of my district leadership, I think everybody says that, of course, family is the most important thing to me, except when it comes up against work, far too often work is chosen. And as a young husband, a young father, a young superintendent, quite frankly, I would say the same thing everyone else said. Oh, my faith and my family are the most important things to me. Except when there's a football game and it competes with something that my kid's doing, I'm going to the district. And my wife was very, I think, instrumental in centering me, helping me appreciate in my youth what was most important. And that was, most of the time it was her, but our family as well. And now after 25 years of marriage, I'm not so sure she wants me at home as much and says, you should apply for that job and work really hard and go to work every day. But exercise is also an important part of helping me stay centered and focus on what's important, and taking care of myself is one of those things, and fun. This is a hard job, and it requires, I think, a very dynamic person that has the capacity to be mostly positive, mostly optimistic, and try to create a work environment for people that there's laughter and humor. And that is something that is a part of my personality that I think has helped me get through some of the very, very difficult times in district leadership. Our office in our district is a fun place to work. And not every day, because it's a tough job, and people are dealing with tough issues and tough situations with kids and families. But if you don't have fun and you don't have humor, I don't think it's really worth going to work. So that's something that I would hope to bring to Waterford. I want to have fun, we want to have humor, we want to do this. We have a great job. We have a great job. Our job has purpose, our job has meaning. People remember us, we make an impact in the lives of kids and teachers and communities that last a lifetime. That's a great thing to be a part of, but it's also very taxing emotionally if you invest in it. And gosh, having a good time while you're doing it seems to be a choice that I would rather have than not.
Vice President Wagner.
What does an effective relationship between the board and superintendent look like, and how do you cultivate such a relationship?
Again, I go back to honesty. I think directness, strict adherence to district goals that everyone can commit to, I think is an important, norm of collaboration. I have worked with 19 board members in my time as superintendent. The 7 that hired me, there was 4 or 5 in between, and now the current 7 board, none of whom were on the board at my hiring. And that is a very unique thing. The average superintendent's tenure in Michigan is around 2.5 years, so to be in the same place for 14 years, having worked with that many board members, I think I have established a reputation with those 19 folks, not all of which were always positive, right? These are tough situations we're dealing with, but we were honest, we were direct, we adhered to district goals. I've been very blessed to have solidly strong board leadership that was able to help the board maintain direction. I think understanding the unique and important lanes that we both occupy. Board has a very set of identified responsibilities, both formal and informal. The superintendent, as the CEO of the organization, he or she has a set of formal requirements of the job and informal. And I see in my experience where boards and leadership teams begin to go astray is where either one of the people in that relationship, either the board or the superintendent, lose track or sight of what their lane is. And one is not more important, less important than the other. They're just different and unique. Different doesn't mean less than. Unique doesn't mean less than. It just means different. And so if we can establish what those are, and I am direct and honest with you when I feel like things are going off kilter, and the same is true, you to me or to whoever the superintendent is, then that honesty, that transparency, that humility to be able to receive criticism constructively is how we model as the head of the district for the adults in our community what we hope to see in our kids. So to me, the greatest responsibility that a Board of Education and superintendent and leadership team have is modeling at the top of the organization how adults disagree, how adults arrive at decision, how adults communicate. I think that that's really lacking in our world today when you look at what's happening on social media or in the news. And we can't control that. We have to control the controllables, and all we can control as a board and a leadership team is what do we model for our organization. If there's stability here, that trickles down and resonates throughout the entire organization. If there is instability here, if it's a circus, if everyone is doing their own thing and it's 7 moving parts and my team is doing their own thing, we can't possibly marshal towards the stated goals that we have. So to me, it's as simple as honesty, directness, the capacity to listen, to receive criticism, deliver on our promises to the community as a team, not as independent bodies, and a real belief that accountability in our results is what's preeminent in our thinking as opposed to how we look or what we think about our decision. The rock that our decisions have to be broken against is what is best for the staff and students and the community members. Those are our number one priority. How it affects us personally, politically, in my own leadership are distant seconds to those considerations.
Thank you, Mr. Wandrie. Treasurer Donahue.
Please tell us about your experience with school finance and how you develop budgets that gain broad support.
This is a relatively simple answer. We have a very robust process in Lapeer called the Budget Managers Process, and we begin that pretty much in earnest in December prior to June approval of a final budget. And it includes a little over 40 staff members, community members, who are essentially on an annual basis given access to all the variables that we discern in the budget process, including legislative updates, local variables, all the books. We have multiple presentations that is inclusive of union leadership, and we do that as a way to build consensus, not only about what the eventual budget will become that is presented to the board, but about the projections that the board leadership team is utilizing, and the fact that all of those employees and various groups are included at the outset. We don't have closed door budget meetings. Do we have discussions behind the scenes about what we think is coming down the road, what's coming from Lansing, what's our enrollment look like, what are the local variables? Certainly, but every single one of those is presented to the board and the budget managers team beginning in December. So there is no, we're hiding it. Bam, it's May, and the board is hearing for the first time the thinking of the leadership team. So half of our year literally is spent in the budget development process. No pet projects, no sacred cows. We maintain strict adherence to our stated district goals. Those district goals are measured on a dashboard. It is an ongoing process. There is not a beginning of the year board presentation on district goals and budgeting and finance or curriculum or instruction, and then at the end of the year we do a wrap-up to see how we did. We are continually updating the board and our staff on very measurable metrics used to judge and assess all of those things. I can only speak to the results. We're in a declining enrollment state like many districts find themselves. When I came to Lapeer, we were a little over 6,200 students. We're down to 4,000. I have led the district in a number of school closures, in a constriction of the overall footprint of the district, a reduction in staff, some difficult labor negotiations, all of which have gotten us to a point of being fiscally responsible. We have now added to our fund equity for 8 consecutive years. I have never received anything but the highest opinion from our third-party auditors, which now is termed unmodified. We have reached fair labor agreements with every single bargaining unit. And Bulletin 1014, which is produced, I'm sure you're all familiar with that, produced by the MDE, which rank orders districts relative to a number of financial metrics, but essentially tabulates and compares you to your partners across the state, all 500 plus districts, telling you what your amended budgets value by the percentage of the money that goes in a particular area. So for example, in administrative and operational costs, Lapeer is in the bottom 25% of districts in the state, meaning we have really low-end upper management costs and operations costs, and we're in the top 25% in terms of instruction and curriculum support, so money that's going directly into classrooms. That is an independent report that I analyze every single year because I want to know, compared to our partner districts, both locally and across the state, where do we rank and how we spend our money, and that's very important to us. So very proud of that, even though revenue has certainly been a challenge given our declining enrollment status.
Turn it over again to Secretary Torres.
Thank you. How do you recruit, develop, and lead a management team? Give us an example of how you've done this in the past.
Yeah, certainly it's a combination in districts of our size of two things. It is the recruitment of, if I'm talking about a central office leadership team, it is the growth and development and internal promotion for certain folks, and it is the attraction and recruitment of folks external to your district that you think can add value. When I know a lot of districts who make the mistake of 100% of the other. So either 100% internal promotion, it's locked to the outside, or we always go outside and bring in the district's top management. I think that is a critical error. So our team is a very healthy and diverse balance of both of those. In Lapeer in particular, coming from Waterford, coming from Dearborn, there was a bit of small town thinking when I came there. So I was very intentional on who I hired when I did have vacancies emerge. So for example, I went to the Port Huron schools and recruited and hired their special education director, went to my assistant superintendent, who's now our director of business operations, was from Southfield and Troy, and then was able to internally promote my human resource director and director of curriculum and instruction. And we've built the team, and there's other positions, but was very intentional about finding folks in districts that had dealt with some very large-scale change, were bigger than Lapeer. Specifically, I wanted that. But my HR director was the APAD at Dryden High School, right? And Dryden High School is a very, very small Lapeer County school district. My curriculum instruction director was a homegrown product. She started out as a paraprofessional in our district, became a teacher, a building principal, and then I promoted her to assistant superintendent. So you've got a nice combination of folks that have a deep connection to Lapeer and folks that come in and add some additional external skills. And my current central office team has been together for over 10 years.
Back to Trustee Joslin, please.
What unique skills or leverage could you bring to this position, and how will the Waterford School District be served by this?
I'm going to shorten up my answers. I've got 5 minutes. I'm an excellent communicator and a motivator. I build consensus, and I have a proven track record of doing just that. I have led very large organizations in seismic shifts organizationally and from a community perspective. It's not just about being a superintendent here in Michigan for the past 14 years. I think it's about what has been put into those years, and any objective review of my resume while a superintendent in Lapeer, I think, bears that out.
Trustee Petrucia.
Describe how you function and communicate effectively and respectfully to staff and community within the context of varying beliefs, behaviors, and backgrounds.
Number one, I focus on the behavior, not the person. I automatically presume positive intentions for everyone I interact with, whether it's a passionate parent concerned about something happening in their school, whether it's a staff member requiring some accountability, or it's a student having a tough time. Automatically presume that they do want what's best for them, they just maybe don't know how to get there. That's number one. Being a leader is not about cramming your own beliefs down on a community and staff. It's about building consensus given the best information available, and being honest with both good news and bad. I think people have a great capacity to hear bad news, but depending on the delivery mechanism, the speaker's capacity to respect the humanity of the person that's hearing the bad news, I think far too often we don't put enough time into doing that. I believe greatly in accountability, but I don't believe in belittling people to achieve it.
Thank you. Can you tell us about a time when you created a work environment in which people wanted to do their best? How did you create that climate, and what was the result?
Just go back to an earlier answer I gave about trusting people. I had an assistant principal come to me several years ago and say, Matt, I want to introduce you to a new advanced placement course called AP Research and Seminar. It's a 3-hour instructional video that you have to watch, and then we're going to have a discussion afterwards. I said, great. I watched the first 15 minutes and I said, we're doing this, get it done. I believed in it, and I believed in that person, and I believe it stunned him because he and I did not have a very good relationship. We had several difficult conversations, but he was an absolute expert relative to advanced placement, and I knew the principal was on board, the AP was on board, I saw several of our AP teachers there, I saw 15 minutes of the video, and I said, get it done. We were the first high school in the state of Michigan to have that course. We still have it to this day, and our college-bound students have come back on a number of occasions and said that coursework, that 2-year coursework in AP Research and Seminar prepared me to go to Michigan, prepared me to go to Harvard, prepared me to go to West Point, and it took us 15 minutes to decide. So sometimes having trust in people, and I had that person's loyalty and commitment for the remaining time that he worked in Lapeer, because he said, and he told me this, I can't believe, given our relationship, that you trusted me. And I said, it's not about you and I liking each other, it's about what was best for the kids, and that certainly was.
If you would, please describe your experience as an educational advocate at the local, state, or national level.
Quick one, I was the regional rep for our county, the MASA, the Superintendent's Association, for 9 years. I was on the support committee for the Governor's Council on Educator Effectiveness, writing our current legislation as it relates to educator evaluation. I was a part of the MDE consulting team called the Reaching and Teaching Struggling Learners, which really was a group of educators across the state, a multi-year project designed at how do we get to kids who don't like school, how do we get to students with IEPs, how do we get to kids with the changing economic environment that don't think the traditional method of instruction is relevant to them anymore. And it really informed me in my leadership for the last 10 years since I participated in that. So I've always been active in state and local. I can't speak to national in terms of my actual advocacy or direct involvement.
Thank you. Vice President Wagner.
I feel like we're speed reading right now. Tell us how you have used your knowledge of student learning and educational research to guide curriculum development and increase student achievement.
We out of time? Looks. Okay, really quickly, okay. So the 3 researchers that I have modeled my own leadership after are threefold: John Hattie, Rick DeFore, and Mike Schmoker. Our primary objective being to focus on teaching and learning practices that have the greatest effect size, meaning they've been studied, and meta-analysis that indicates that there are certain practices in classrooms that work better than others. Not that some are bad and some are good, but some are great and some work, and I want to only focus on those. Implementation of learning coaching in our district, we spent a lot of money making sure that our teachers have the shoulder-to-shoulder support they need to get better at their craft, not just evaluating them to effectiveness, but actually providing legitimate support in doing that. Developing a robust system of learning coaching, including that feedback, instructional rounds, PLCs like I mentioned before, and I think our numbers speak for itself relative to student achievement. I encourage you to look at those results in your free time. I've had a reward school, a number of reward schools, beating the odds schools, schools that have 75% free and reduced lunch that have been the highest achieving in our county and our district, and compared to their peers across the state. So very, very proud of that, although if I'm being honest, the folks in the curriculum instruction department have a heck of a lot more to do with that than I do. So
So I just want to give you just another minute or two by way of our last question here. So we appreciate your interest in becoming our next superintendent. Do you have anything additional to share that we haven't talked about this evening? In just a couple minutes.
the only thing I want to say very, very quickly is selecting a superintendent is about fit. And I truly do hope that whether it's me or someone else, that it's the best decision for Waterford. I just love this place, and I hope that if it's me, great, but if not, I'm going to be that person's biggest cheerleader and supporter. I'm in a great position. I love my job. I love where I'm at with my family and my professional life. It would really have to be a transcendent opportunity to get me out of the rather comfortable position that I find myself in. And I believe Waterford is such a position. So I know it's an hour and we're I apologize for my long-winded approach to the first 8 questions, but it got to some succinct responses in the final 7, so that's a good thing. And I'm excited about the opportunity. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate very much your interest in our superintendent position, and thank you for being here this evening. As you know, the board is interviewing a number of candidates, and we will contact you if you are selected as a finalist. So thank you very much for coming, and we enjoyed meeting with you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next, everybody. Colleagues? Okay, again, thank you so much for filling out that feedback form. There will be another opportunity to fill out that form after we conclude our second interview this evening. We're now going to continue with our interviews this evening and welcome Kathy Kohanski to Craig tonight for a little conversation. Hello, welcome.
Hi, thank you very much. If I shake hands? Trustee Donahue, nice to meet you. Trustee Jocelyn, nice to meet you. Trustee Wagner. President Ristich, hi. Trustee Sutherland, hi. Nice to meet you.
So just so we're pronouncing this, Kohanski?
Kohanski, you got it right.
Got it.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for that. Gonna make,
Welcome.
thank you.
For being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So we've had, as you know, the opportunity to review your resume. If you don't mind, starting us off by telling us a little bit about what specifically interests you in the Waterford Superintendency and how your background and experience make you a good fit to be our next superintendent.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity tonight. Thank you to the Board of Education here in Waterford and to all of you. As President Ristich said, my name's Kathy Kohanski. Currently the Assistant Superintendent in charge of Learning Services for the Walled Lake Consolidated School District, so neighbors right across the street. I have been in education for 30 years. This is my 30th year, although it goes pretty quickly, and I still feel like I'm excited to see where the next 8 to 10 years of my career take me. So I'm really excited about that. I have served as a teacher, as a principal, as a literacy specialist, and then currently, like I said, I'm the assistant superintendent in Walled Lake. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a mom. I have 2 kids. I have a 22-year-old son who's working in engineering right now, and I have an 18-year-old daughter who is a senior and about to graduate from high school this year, ready to go off and be an educator next year in college. So I'm excited about that trajectory for her. I grew up playing softball. I grew up also playing the piano, so I have a little bit of a unique perspective on both the sports and the fine arts. But we raised our kids on an all-sports lake, a lot like families in the community here in Waterford. And so as I'm here before you this evening, I really want to talk a little bit about my why and why Waterford and how I feel I connect to the community a little bit here. So I grew up in the 70s and 80s, right next door in Lake Orion, not far away from here. And I was the youngest of 4 kids. My parents were children of immigrants, and they grew up with not a whole lot. My dad actually grew up without electricity in his household. And so he had a lot more a lot more needs than he had wants. But one of the things that my parents instilled in me and in all of my siblings was this perseverance and this grit. You might not think about this when you look at me because I don't present like how I grew up, but I grew up in a really economically disadvantaged household. My parents worked really hard, but I had food insecurities when I was a young child growing up. I had housing insecurities. Month to month, we would, sometimes wonder if we were going to be able to keep a roof over our heads. But my parents believed in hard work and they believed in education, and so they really persisted. When my parents were able to pull together enough to start a small manufacturing business, I observed my mom and my dad helping employees. Oftentimes our employees couldn't read or write well, so my mom would read their mail to them and make sure that they knew exactly, if they had a bill that came in the mail or if they had something that they needed to take care of. So I really learned that servant leadership from watching my parents, and I watched how my parents took care of those who were less fortunate. When my mom passed away, I was 19, and so I took that role on. I commuted to college for my undergrad degree, and I took that role of my mom in terms of being there to help those others and help people. And really, that lit a fire inside of me to want to become a teacher and to want to help. And so really when I got into teaching, I never had the thought that one day I would become a leader or become a superintendent, but along the way, I've learned that my servant leadership helps others. I can help build systems and help make things better for kids. I know that public education and post-high education was my ticket to finding success in life and finding a better pathway forward. So I've lived that. That's my example that I set. I think that I can identify with a lot of families here in Waterford, and you might not think about that just by looking at me, but the story that I bring and my lived experience, I think helps me relate to families and helps me relate to students. And I would love to bring that experience, as well as my experience over 30 years in public education as a teacher and as a specialist, as a principal and as a leader, to help move Waterford and your initiatives forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now going to turn it over to Vice President Wagner.
Please share an example of a time you have led a sustained multi-year improvement initiative, such as a strategic plan. Be specific regarding the situation, the task at hand, your specific role, and the outcome.
Thank you for that. So, strategic planning is something that's really vital to the district. It's really important to ensure that everybody and all stakeholders are rowing in the same direction. And that's that one thing that strategic plan does. It provides that vision, it provides that direction, and it's important that all stakeholders are involved in that. So I've been involved in strategic planning in a number of districts. Prior to being in Walled Lake, I was in Rochester. Prior to working in Rochester, I worked in Troy. Those were places that I was really involved at the district level in terms of organizing and planning for and implementing strategic planning. I love your vision of inspired and educated and empowered to thrive. I think that those are things that really embody the heart of a really good strategic plan. I love the collaboration that you have around the 5 areas that you've highlighted with your strategic plan too, and I know that you're in year 3 of seeing that strategic plan unfold. The work that I've been involved with in Walled Lake has really been around the academic side of folding in our MyKIP goals, that's the Michigan Integrated Continuous Improvement Process, and really digging deeply into the data and what we know we need to focus on in order to help our students to achieve and help our system grow and get better. So working with our large group of stakeholders, we spent about a year really digging in and studying our data. What is our data showing us? What do our students, what really seems to be the root at what that barrier is and getting in the way of them achieving? And so we identified a couple of things. We identified vocabulary, and we also identified comprehension, reading comprehension. So that really began our focus on how do we drill down and how do we build a system around that so that we can realize our vision of helping all of our students succeed. So we monitored the progress over the last couple of years. We've put some really specific strategies in place, and we've built all of our professional learning around that. So it's really been a laser focus from teaching and learning on helping to build teachers' capacity in understanding how to teach, especially with regard to students who might be struggling in those areas. So really using data as our guide, we engaged in that work. We've been monitoring along the way, and I gave a board update last spring. Several of the areas that we identified on the M-STEP, as well as in our local diagnostic, which we use the iReady assessment. I know you use NWEA here in Waterford. Very similar type of an assessment. And one of the things we noted was that those areas that we had previously, several years prior, noted as needing improvement, we're no longer needing improvement. So we're making gains in those areas, and we're seeing a lot of growth from our students. So I really believe, though, that it's not just about the academics. The work that I do in leading our team really folds over into personnel. It folds over into classroom environments. It folds over into leadership. So I touch all of those areas of a strategic plan, even though my work has centered really on the academic pieces, because one doesn't just live in isolation. It's really part of the overall working system. So I would love to bring that experience and that passion for strategic plan work and really delving in deeply and looking at the data within the system and how we can make improvements and reach that vision together.
Treasurer Dunn, please.
As our superintendent, how would you work to ensure and enhance the sustainability and reputation of our district?
So I'd like to start talking first about reputation, because I think one drives the other. What I think about reputation is people's perceptions of you are really their reality. And as superintendent, you really are the face of the district. So you are the person that's out in front. You're championing the work that you're doing. You're out in front of the public. You're out in the schools. You're at the county, the state, sometimes the national level, talking about the work that you're doing. So that reputation carries a really heavy weight with it. What I think about reputation is, I think about three things that really contribute strongly to having a good reputation. Number one is integrity. I am a person of integrity. My words and my actions match all the time. I'm not a different person in private than I am in public. The person that you see is the person that you get, and I'm consistent about that. I'm well aware that as public servants, we're really monitored and we're watched often. So that role of the superintendent is to lead with integrity and always be that person of integrity out when you're out and about. I also hold myself to really high standards. I think that that's something that's really important when it comes to your expectations. I don't expect anything less from someone than I would give myself. So I'm a shoulder partner oftentimes. I work right alongside teams. I have no problem doing that, and I think that holding others to those high standards is really important when it comes to perception. Thirdly, I've maintained a really professional image. Like I said, I've worked in Oakland County for the last 30 years. I've worked in places like Troy and Rochester and Walled Lake. I've also worked in smaller districts like Clarkston and Brandon. And all of those times, I've always maintained a professional public image because I think that that's really important when it comes to perception. Now, how does perception drive that sustainability? What I think about that is, I think about that the superintendent is that model of the district. and that the standards of integrity and conduct and professional image really work to create those networks and those supports and those contacts that help maintain and create sustainability within a district. So I translate how I work with those things in mind across all of our teams. So whether that be myself working with the cabinet, whether that be myself working with human resources, or the business and finance team, or our operations and facilities, that I model that and that I expect nothing less of those that work with me. So I also know that professional image is important, especially when you're working outside of the community too. So it's not just the work you do within the schools, but what is your image like when you're working at the county level with the Oakland County Superintendents Association, or when you're working with K-12 Alliance or the Michigan Association of School Administrators? I belong to those groups, I've worked with those groups, and I attend conferences. So that professional image, I think, is important because I think that gets in front of how you create sustainability and elevate the work that's going on here in Waterford, and communicate that with those that can help provide resources and the necessary things that we need to be successful.
We're going to pass the mic down to Secretary Torres next.
If you could tell us about a challenge you've experienced in bringing a diverse group of people to consensus on a difficult issue. How did you provide leadership, and what was the outcome?
Thank you for that. I can tell you that one of the things that I've been working on, and one of the things I'm still currently working on, is really taking a look at literacy initiatives. That's kind of been a bit of a difficult topic, I would say, out in the public. Look, literacy is a critical skill. Every parent wants their child to be able to read and write well. And we know that that's an important life skill that leads to future success no matter what pathway a student may be on. The last few years we've seen a lot of ideas about how literacy ought to be taught. We've read about it in the paper, we've heard about it on the news, and we've certainly seen it play out in our classrooms across the county, across the state, across the nation really. And there's a lot of ideas about what's the best way to teach reading. We have staff with ideas, we have parents with ideas, we have community members bringing ideas forward. And when those ideas might feel like they conflict with one another, that can really pose a challenge. And so a lot of that over the last few years that's been really bubbling up in our society has landed on my shoulders when it comes to teaching and learning in Walled Lake. One of the things I like to do is I like to try to stay away from the emotional side of it and really point to the data and the research side of it. So that's one of the ways that I've begun leading with this charge, is really taking a look at what does research tell us, all areas of research, but the most important piece is what is our data showing us. So I've really communicated with our staff, with our parents, with the board, and with the community at large what our data story is showing us about how our children are learning to read and write, and what is our literacy progress looking like. So we've really centered on our data story. We focused on that rather than just the emotional side of it, and really benchmarking what are other high-performing districts doing when it comes to literacy. So I think it's important not just to get kind of stuck in your own ideas and thoughts, but really to look out and see what are others doing. I applaud Waterford. I know that you've been really intentional about focusing on some curricular upgrades and initiatives in the last few years, and I know that literacy has been one of the things that's very important and critical when it comes to your strategic plan. So supporting staff, though, is key anytime it comes to that, and so one of the things that I've led is heavy support for our staff. You can't have an expectation that staff can help students who are struggling without giving staff what they need. And so through professional learning, really key targeted coaching supports, our staff have been able to receive high levels of support. And around those high levels of support, we have high expectations. And what we do is we monitor our data really closely. I've kept in close contact with the board. I've given routine and regular updates about our data and our progress. And I'm really glad to report that after the last several years, even in light of some of the challenges and some of the emotional side of talking about literacy, our students are making great progress. We've seen excellent growth from all students, but we've really seen excellent growth from students that are performing 1, 2, and 3 years behind where we would like them to be. And so we're going to keep on that trajectory. Like I said, there's opinions, there's thoughts, there's research, and then there's data. And we let our data help guide us, and we let our data help tell that story.
Thank you so much. We're going to pass the mic now to Trustee Jocelyn.
How do you maintain visibility and accessibility for staff, parents, and community groups?
I think that's fantastic. I mentioned in one of my earlier answers that the superintendent is really the face of the district, and so visibility is really key. A long time ago, I had a really wise school psychologist that I worked with back in my Rochester days, and he told me once that administration jobs, especially jobs like a superintendent, it feels a lot like you're working on the roof. A lot of people don't see you; they don't see the work that's going on, but they'll sure come looking for you if the roof starts to leak. So I look at it that way, that yes, we do a lot of work behind the scenes, but visibility is critical, and it's really important that people see you and they know that you're there and that you care. I think it's really important to build things into your calendar. I think it's important that you set dates so that you're maintaining visibility and keeping that at the forefront. One of the things that I do along with the team in Walled Lake is we have routinely, right on the calendar, set visits to go out and be in schools. If you don't put it on your calendar, other priorities take hold and other things get in the way. So we make sure that we're out and about. I'm attending professional developments. I'm popping in. I'm dropping by for staff meetings. I think that those are really critical. And then you can be on the forefront of talking to staff and having FaceTime with them, getting feedback informally as well as formally, because we do take formal feedback from our staff too. But I think that observing, talking, interacting in our school buildings with all staff, not just our teaching staff, is really critical and really important to maintaining that visibility. But I also know that visibility looks different from the superintendency when you're talking about visibility within the community. So those things like, I look forward to things like attending football games. I'm a huge football fan. I'm a Lions fan. As a kid growing up, we were a football household. My brother grew up playing football, and that was something that we enjoy. But not just that. I love golf. I've coached my own children in golf. I've been at their sporting events. I look forward to being at the events here in Waterford and celebrating and championing the work that the kids are doing, and then interacting with the community. I think that it's important to be at those PTO meetings, at those PAC meetings. I think it's important to be at foundation events, fundraisers. I think it's really, relationships are key. And these are things that I've done in my current position in Walled Lake, and that are really easily transferable right here into Waterford as the superintendent. I think that our parents are so busy. I would love the opportunity to work here with Sarah and her team. I think there's other ways to be visible. I think social media presence, appropriate social media presence, is really important. I think it's another way to reach families and to get the word out and be visible. Pre-recorded interviews and podcasts are also great ways, because we have busy working families. They might not be able to be at events if they're working an evening shift or they're working a second job. So I think you have to look at broad ways of reaching your community and being visible. And then lastly, I think that there's visibility outside of the district that's really important. I'm very involved in organizations like I had mentioned before. I think it's important to be involved legislatively, talking to your local legislators, talking to legislators at the state and national level, and really advocating for the supports that public schools need, the funding that our students need in order for us to be able to deliver that high quality product for our students to help them find success. I think building partnerships within the community is another really critical piece. So getting to know the small businesses around here. One thing that I've done in Walled Lake is expanding CTE offerings. We've been really forming relationships with local businesses in looking at what can we do to expand new pathways for students, new employment opportunities post-high. So I think that those are ways to become visible and make yourself visible. Those are ways I'm visible currently, and ways that I would see bringing that kind of approach here to Waterford and maintaining visibility with the staff, with the parents, and with the community.
Thank you. Trustee Petrucia is up next.
Share an experience that illustrates your commitment and capacity to providing an inclusive and responsive environment for all students and staff, while also ensuring a transparent decision-making process.
So I think that it's really important when you're creating environments that are inclusive and supportive for all learners, that you really have to make sure you're setting up your plans ahead of time. My dad always used to say, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. So make sure you've got your planning in place. And one of the things that I've been really honored to be in charge of over the last 5 years in Walled Lake is their 2019 bond. So about a month before I was hired, Walled Lake passed a $316 million bond, not unlike a really large bond. I know Waterford here, you passed a really large bond back about 4 years ago, and that work's continuing. So I drive through the community as I head to work each day, so I see some of the great things that are taking place from a bond construction standpoint. But one of the things that was part of the charge that was given to me when I joined the team in Walled Lake was that there were some specialized projects that I was going to oversee that was part of the 2019 bond. Those included a brand new Dublin Elementary, which borders Waterford, not just a stone's throw across the way. A brand new early childhood center, which is something that opened 2 years ago. We're really proud of that work. And a brand new academic wing at Walled Lake Western High School. And incorporated in all of that were small projects throughout all of our 21 buildings. And my other piece of overseeing that bond work was really looking at how do we create new learning environments from furniture and other items for building those classrooms of tomorrow. So I was in charge of pre-K through 12th grade furniture selections and really recreating those learning environments. And it's really, really important that the planning takes place well ahead of implementing that process. So working with the architect really closely, we were able to pull together, I led teams of people at each of those levels. So we had a preschool team, an elementary, a middle, a high school team over the course of the last 5 years, and we've really worked to look at involving our students, involving our parents, having sample furniture out, getting feedback from family, or getting feedback from students, running furniture fairs, getting feedbacks from our community and feedback from our parents, and feedback from staff. So that transparency is really built in that feedback loop, really talking about what our vision looks like for classrooms of tomorrow, and then how does our work really translate into that. So I led that work over the last 5 years. I'm really glad to say that we're wrapping up with our very last high school. The Walled Lake Northern High School will get brand new furniture next year. But it's more than just replacing a desk with a desk or a chair with a chair. It's really about how do we utilize those spaces to be inclusive and to be responsive. And so wrapped up in that was a really intentional professional learning approach so that our teachers are getting the latest in research when it comes to using and utilizing new furniture and new classroom layouts that aligns really with our instructional focus. And so that's really where we're at right now, is continuing to provide that ongoing professional learning and helping our teachers understand the intention behind how we use that furniture to be inclusive and to be responsive so that all students can thrive and be engaged.
Thank you. Trustee Sutherland, please.
Thank you. How do you decide when it's appropriate to involve others, such as teachers, other administrators, students, parents, or the board, in your decision-making process?
So I think involving people in decision-making is critical. Oftentimes, and we feel this too as systems, we feel like things are done to us rather than done with us. And we see those when things legislatively happen and there's unfunded mandates that come down on the schools. And we have to then respond and provide the appropriate response, but without the support and without the input oftentimes. And so that's really, really critical that anytime you're making decisions at the district level, that you involve stakeholders as appropriate. One of the things that I like to employ is a first order, second order change framework. So there's lots of decisions. We make 1 million of them a day. But when do decisions rise to the level of we need to involve more stakeholders, we need a process around this? And I'll give you a quick example. So first order change might be something like, oh my goodness, you know, the road commission said they're going to pave the street right out in front of the school and from noon to 5, but it's going to wrap up at 5 p.m. Okay, well, we're probably going to have to look at parking somewhere differently, or we're going to have to look at bringing our parents in around through the other loop. That might be a smaller stakeholder group that you involve in making a decision such as that. You might involve the facilities and operations person, you might involve your principal, you might involve community relations because you might have to get some word out about that. But it's a short-term change, something that's not long-lasting, so something that doesn't have heavy impact. So first order change doesn't always necessarily have to involve large groups, and it doesn't necessarily have to bring a lot of people together. But second order change does. And second order change is really where you're looking at moving big things. That's where you're really looking at moving large initiatives. You might be moving teaching and learning. You might be talking about bond. You might be examining your facilities. Those types of decisions are second order change because they have heavy impact and it involves a lot of people. So when those stakeholders are involved or affected, you want to involve them in that decision-making process. And so you really have to plan for that. And when you bring groups together, another piece that I like to share anytime I'm bringing a group together that's focusing on decision-making is there's a framework called the 5 levels of decision-making. And sharing that right off the bat with any group that's come together really helps clear up misperceptions or miscommunication. The worst thing you want to do is to bring a group together and they think that they're going to be the ones making the decision, when maybe they're the ones making a recommendation and the board might be making a decision, or the board and the superintendent, or the board might make a decision based on the superintendent and team's recommendations. So you really have to be clear about what type of level of decision it is. Is it a decision that the committee's going to make? Is it a decision that the committee's going to make with other input? Is it a decision that they're going to discuss and then recommend for others to make? So it's really important to be clear and concise about all of that and communicate that. That's part of that transparency piece. And so I've used those types of strategies when it comes to making decisions. I know I've got a little fire truck going by there. Hopefully they're okay. We'll let the sirens pass. But and then in addition to second order change, I think it's really important that you don't just focus on the process itself, but you focus on the people that are affected. And so recently I've been part of the work in Walled Lake on looking at our facility study that we completed last year with Plant Moran Real Point. And part of that facility study showed that we needed to look at repurposing one of our middle schools. We're looking at going from a 4 middle school to a 3 middle school model. And so taking the approach that all of those that are affected by that decision need to be part of the process. And so we had a really large group of stakeholders that met all last year, looked at the data, and provided a recommendation, which was then taken to the board. And the superintendent worked with the board on that recommendation. But you also have to take care of the people. So when that decision came out and we decided which building it was going to be that we would be studying the feasibility of repurposing, the team and I went out and we checked on the staff and the students. We checked on the parents in the community and made ourselves available so that no one felt like this was done to them. We were right there with them, supporting them and listening. And then lastly, when it comes to the board making decisions, look, I know that and you guys know too, that there are things that you're involved in decision making that's just the general nature of the board, right? You're involved in policy, you're involved in budget, you're involved in making decisions about staffing and curriculum, facilities, just like as I had described. But I think it's important that, and we'll talk about relationships, I know, as far as it goes with superintendent and board relations, but I think it's critical that any other types of decisions, I keep open lines of communication with you on, that there is never a surprise when it comes to decisions that get made. And so I know that we'll talk about, I'm anxious and look forward to talking about some ways that we'll look at a communication plan together, but I know it's critical for whether that be from a daily to a weekly update. Those are the kinds of things that are critical. So even if it's not a decision that the board necessarily typically makes, you're going to hear about that decision making from me. You're going to hear about what the team and I are working on. I'm going to be bringing that information to you so that no decisions are made in isolation and there are absolutely no surprises when it comes to the work that the board is doing. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So considering your past accomplishments, what are some of the reasons for your success? And how have you overcome the difficulties you may have encountered?
Well, as I stated before, I've been really fortunate to have a lot of great mentors to work with over the years during my time in Troy and Rochester, Walled Lake, and even fine examples of dedicated leadership in places like Clarkston and Brandon. I really feel like when it comes to achieving success, there's an art and a science to it. In some of my prior answers, I know I explained processes and frameworks and planning and thinking about all of that, and that's really that science or that skill behind planning for success. I think you have to think about things like, what kind of change are you working on? Who should be involved in that? What are the steps that you take? How do you build your team? How do you look for the strengths of the people that you bring to that work? How do you communicate it? How do you make sure you're being transparent with everyone and all the stakeholders? How do you give the people the tools that they need in order to implement what it is you're planning and to help them to find success? I think you have to be checking in regularly. I think you just don't create something, let it go, and then check in later. You have to check in regularly and monitor progress. And then I think it's important that you share success and celebrate the hard work that people do. And so I think that skill and that science behind how I plan and what I do is really critical to success. And at the times when I haven't been successful, I look back across that and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, was there something from a planning perspective or something that maybe we didn't see or that I didn't notice? So I'm really reflective about that. But then there's the art side of it. And the art side of it to me is the personality piece. So how do you lead and inspire others to follow you? And one of the things, I said it before, but I think it's really critical, is that you have to be willing to be a shoulder partner with folks. I think you shouldn't be expecting others to do things that you wouldn't do yourself. And that the role of the superintendent to encourage, to focus on strengths and assets, to communicate, to be transparent, and to inspire through that example and that role model that you're meant to be. So I think there's a two sides to it. I think there's the skill and the science part of it, and the planning and being very intentional about that, but I also think there's the personality piece. And so that's the thing that you can't really teach people. That's just who I am, and that's what I bring. I've been really fortunate to work with some incredible teams over the years. And I believe that if you talk to others, even those beyond the references that are on my application materials and my resume, you'll find that I am that kind of leader, that I'm that kind of personality that people follow, and that putting the skills and the science of it in place helps me to find success.
Thank you. Vice President Wagner.
What does an effective relationship between the board and superintendent look like, and how do you cultivate such a relationship?
Absolutely. Well, I think that you guys are charged with probably one of the most difficult tasks, and that is finding a new leader for your schools. And it's not just finding that leader for your schools, but finding that person that you can, have a relationship with. I think that that's really critical, that relationships are at the heart of all of the work that we do. And so I would envision that each one of us would have a close personal working relationship. I think I would really welcome that in starting out with one-on-one meetings. I want to get to know each one of you. Many of you have been on the board for a long time. Some of you just are newer to the board. I want to talk and get to know you. What's your story? I've shared a little bit about mine. I would love to share more. I'm really relationship focused, and I see us as a team of 8. Not necessarily a team of 7 with a superintendent. So I know that we would really work to build that relationship on collaboration, built on trust. Like I said, I'm a person of my word, I'm a person of my actions, so that integrity piece is important for me. And that as you get to know me, you'll get to see that. I think open lines of communication and accessibility are super important. So I want to be able to contact you just like you want to be able to contact me. I'm no stranger to being accessible on nearly a 24/7 role. I think that once you become an administrator, that's pretty much the life that you begin to live. And I look forward to those relationships, because I think the more we get to work and know one another, and the more we find out what our passions are, what your goals are for the district, why you joined the board, why you're on the board, if you've been on for a long time, and what you hope to see accomplished here in Waterford, that's where we're going to be able to get the growth, and that's where we're going to be able to make those moves. And then I talked a little bit earlier about communication plans. It's really critical that I communicate often and regularly with each and every one of you, as well as you collectively as a group. So that's really important for us, that as we get to know one another, if I'm lucky enough to be chosen as your next superintendent, we would schedule some board and superintendent workshops where we talk about that and work through that. I know that it's important for us to communicate as a whole. So I'm never going to have a one-on-one conversation that doesn't get shared with the rest of everybody, right? That those are really important things, that the board acts as a whole. I communicate with you as a whole, but I do have one-on-one relationships, and I look forward to that, because I think that the passion that you have, the passion that I have, we can work together to find those pieces to success. But the communication piece is very important. That regular and timely communication is going to really be at the heart of us building and maintaining that trust and that positive relationship together.
Treasurer Donahue.
Please tell us about your experience with school finance and how you develop budgets that gain broad support.
So I had in researching and getting ready, of course, for today's interviews. Obviously, you want an informed candidate, and so I'm an informed candidate. I have had an opportunity to really take a look financially. Waterford's has I think a really healthy fund balance. I think that you've seen some really nice increases in the foundation allowance, which have really helped put you on a really good path financially. Waterford's budget around $100 million, give or take, and I work really closely in Walled Lake with a $180 million budget. So we have a really healthy annual budget, but it can go quickly, and it can go in the blink of an eye. So one of the things that I'm really involved in is a collaborative decision making when it comes to the budget. So my team in learning services, as I stated in one of my earlier answers when it came to strategic planning, is academics and teaching and learning don't live in isolation, right? They impact all those other areas. So I have to collaborate when it comes to the needs and the programs for students, because it impacts human resources. It impacts our facilities. It impacts our business and finance and operations. So all of that really is wrapped up in the heart of the business, and that really is teaching and learning. So I've been intricately involved in budget planning around that $180 million annual budget. I also oversee the grants, so state and federal grants. I oversaw and collaborated with our business and finance team on our COVID and then the post-COVID monies, especially those grants that were used to help bolster student achievement and help give kids a leg up. And so, I really feel like the teaching and the learning, and as all of you know, because you're used to setting those budgets, is 80 to 85% of any good school budget is going to be going towards your core operations. And so really that's the work that I do. I touch about 80 to 85% of that in collaboration with others. But one of those things is so how do you set those budgets? How do you develop them? You need to really look at your priorities. One of the things that we've done, I've lived through cycles of budget reductions. I've also lived through cycles of we have money to spend. And it's interesting being on both sides of that equation, because when you have to cut, those are really difficult decisions to make. So you really need to prioritize students at the heart of every decision that you make. And the more you can keep reductions away from your classrooms and your student programs, the more likely you are to insulate your students from those really negative effects of having to make budget reductions. But it's an ongoing collaborative effort. We bring priorities, all the departments bring priorities to that budget. And so it really, from a superintendent standpoint and overseeing that, is really closely working with your finance and operations folks. You're working with the rest of your cabinet team and talking about what those priorities are, and really checking in regularly on spending, on any budget amendments that need to get passed, and really being careful. It's really frustrating in public ed to have to pass a balanced budget in June without knowing what the state budget is going to be, and so we do a little bit of guesswork on that, right? So you have to make those conservative guesses, you have to make those hypotheses about what you think you can expect to get, and knowing that if you're not really careful with the way that you budget and you don't keep a close eye on it, you could really find yourself in a tight situation where you're having to make reductions where you thought you might not be needing to. And no one wants to find themselves in that. I think one of the things that's important as a system is to maintain stability and to maintain financial responsibility when it comes to that. We have a responsibility to our students as well as our staff. We want to be able to take care of our staff, especially in this day and age when it's really difficult to attract and retain and keep candidates when the teacher pipeline is so tight right now. So we really owe it to not only our kids, but to our employees as well, to be healthy and to be stable. So key pieces to budgeting are critical to the life of the system. So thank you.
We're going to pass it over to Secretary Torres and Ms. Kohanski. We do have about 60 more questions after this, and we're about 15, 20 minutes.
Sure, thank you.
How do you recruit, develop, and lead a management team? Give us an example of how you've done this in the past.
So I have kind of a non-negotiable when it comes to creating teams. If you're not a growth mindset, student-centered thinker, it's going to be really difficult for you to be part of a team that I work with, because students have to be at the heart of everything that we do. And so every employee impacts our students. And so I'm not just talking about our teaching staff, I'm not just talking about a management team, I'm talking about all employees need to have that mindset. But when it comes to creating a management team, I've been part of many cycles of selecting and interviewing and putting in place and mentoring and evaluating management teams in Rochester as well as in Walled Lake. I can tell you that I think one of the really critical things is that you have to start with a really strong process for interviews. I think it's important to have sound hiring practices. Candidates are going to move through that process, and you need to make sure that what you value is what you're asking really closely and carefully of those candidates that are in front of you, because you want to make sure that, like I said, those values and those mindsets align. Because there are things that you know, and then there's who you are. I can teach somebody something and fill in that what you know gap, but I can't change who you are. So the who you are is really important when it comes to creating management teams. I personally, when it comes to management teams, I look for those things that embody the same things that I believe that I possess, and those things are integrity and high standards, positive image, student-first decision-making, being a team player, and having that growth mindset or that assets-based mindset. And so when you can find those kinds of folks, it's easier to bring them on board and coach and mentor and support them. And so I've been really integral in the last 5 years specifically in building management teams in Walled Lake. I've been thankful and fortunate to work with a great cabinet who sees things in similar ways. I think it's important to vet your candidates really carefully because I think that if someone's not the right fit, it's better to find that out at the outset than it is to find out later. Because I've been on the other side where you have to make those really difficult decisions when someone isn't the right fit or it didn't quite work out. And that's a terrible, horrible place to have to be, where you're having conversations with someone about maybe this place or this job or this position isn't the right fit for you. But one thing that I will say is it's important to never compromise, because that management team is going to be critical to the success of your initiatives, to the success of your strategic plan, to the success of increasing student achievement. So everybody's got to be in it to win it when it comes to that. And so from the interviews to onboarding to mentoring and to ongoing leadership, that's the work that I've been involved with, the team in Walled Lake. And I think that we never should settle and we should never compromise when it comes to finding the best for our kids.
Thank you so much. We're going to pass the mic now, please, to Trustee Joslin. Thank you.
What unique skills or leverage could you bring to this position, and how will the Waterford School District be served by this?
So as I mentioned before, you guys have a really heavy responsibility that I'm sure not a lot of people envy. You really have to carefully look at each candidate's experiences. You have to look at what we bring to the table. You have to look at personalities. You have to talk to people about us, and you have to ensure that whoever you select has the traits necessary to do that job. So I've talked a little bit about my personal integrity, my high standards, my professionalism. And those are things that I've carried through and with me for the last 30 years and will continue to. I talked a little bit about that art and science. It's the personality piece, but it's also the skill. I've been really fortunate to have great mentors over the years that have taught me a lot about skill, a lot about being strategic. I think something that I have that's unique is I have a perception when it comes to people. I have really strong relationship and strong people skills, but I'm also super perceptive about things. I think superintendents need to be 2 and 3 steps ahead of things at all times. It's not just making a decision in isolation, but how is that decision going to impact this group And then what could that group's response be to that? So I think I have that unique sense, and I have that unique perceptual ability to kind of read situations, to kind of read people. And then I also know that my own personal story is an example for others. And so that's another unique thing that I believe that I bring to the table, that I bring to the superintendency, and that I think would be of real value to our families and our students here in Waterford.
Trustee Petrucia, please.
Describe how you would function and communicate effectively and respectfully to staff and community within the context of varying beliefs, behaviors, and backgrounds.
Thanks. So in my research, in looking at Waterford and who those folks are and who those students are, it's a really wide array of students and families from a variety of backgrounds. I know that in working with economically disadvantaged populations over the course of my 30 years, it's really important to understand that all families want the best for their kids. All families deserve and need to be communicated with and communicated with clearly. So how do you go about doing that when you have people with a variety of access? I know in Waterford, you've got people who have no problem with high-speed internet, kids with cell phones, everybody's connected, everybody's in touch. You've got families that regularly volunteer at school and they're at school. But we also know we have families who, like I said, they're working 2 or 3 jobs. They might be working the night shift. They might not be able to make parent-teacher conferences. You have English language learners who might not be able to read and write read the communications that are coming home. They can't write back to the teacher. They might not have email if they don't have high-speed internet. And so I think you have to take a really robust approach to communicating with families. I know that for us, for our families that are in economically challenging circumstances, we've looked at low-cost and no-cost internet options and tried to point them in those directions. We've used apps like Remind and some other text-based kinds of things because many families, while they may not be able to have that home connection with a high-speed internet, they probably have a cell phone. So using that as a mode of communication is really important. I'm still a fan of hard copies in a backpack. So I think it's important to know that paper copies of things, that's still an important way to communicate with our families. We use those robocall systems and things too that get right to families to let them know when things are critical and timely. We've also used interpreters for in-person conferences. One of the really cool things that we just purchased was Language Line, which is a video and phone interpreter system, and it can also be used to interpret documents too. So those are things that are really, really critical. As far as communicating with staff, that results in ongoing, timely, and regular communications for me, newsletters, emails, updates, in person. I love in person because, like I said, I'm a people person, I'm relationship focused, so the more I can be out and about and talking to staff is great, but every stakeholder has the right to know what's going on in the community, and in a diverse place like Waterford, it's really important to know how our families get those communications because they deserve that.
Well, we started at 7:06, so I think we
Yep.
have just a couple more minutes for a couple more questions. Treasurer Sutherland, Trustee Sutherland, please.
Great, thank you. Can you tell us about a time when you created a work environment in which people wanted to do their best? How did you create that climate, and what was the result?
So whenever, and I know that all of you have probably been part of teams where you feel like a synergy. You feel like we're all in this together and we're all working towards that same goal. And when you're part of a team like that, it is very energizing, it's really satisfying, and it's really engaging. I love working in those environments, but I also love creating those kinds of environments for others to work in. I talked a little bit earlier about just my personal example setting, But really, building those work environments where people want to do their best, it's really about building what's called a collective efficacy. That means that we all subscribe to the same ideas that we can do this. In the education setting, it means that kids can do this. So we all subscribe to that together, and we all get on the same page with that. But as I mentioned before in one of my answers, it really boils down to not just high expectations of ourselves and of our students, but high support. Because you can't expect folks to do their jobs without giving them the types of supports that they need. And so that's the work environments that I create. I create lots of supports, whether that be through mentoring, modeling, coaching, providing resources. I've gotten really creative with grant usage to provide resources. I know during COVID, not to take us back too much, but there were some really strict restrictions and strings attached to those dollars and how you could spend them. We made a decision as a team, myself along with our business person and our cabinet, that we didn't want to hire a bunch of people with those COVID dollars. We knew they would go away. What we decided to do instead was invest in resources, invest in training, invest in things that would help build the capacity of our teachers. And so that's something that I continue to practice and continue to live by. I've worked hard with my team to develop that. I think pooling all resources around that, that work environment and helping teachers to feel heard and supported is really what results in that type of a climate where people really want to do their best.
Okay, let's ask one more question here, and then we'll give you a chance to share anything else that you might want to share with us. So, if you would please describe your experience as an educational advocate at the local, state, or national level, please. Thank you.
And I did talk about that in one of my previous answers, but I think we face some pretty daunting things in public education today. For those of you I know, Trustee Torres, you're really involved legislatively, and I know that these are things that are super important when it comes to the work that you do. But funding public education, number one, is a primary focus for us that I don't think that we can let go. I know we're facing decreasing enrollment. Many districts are. The decreasing enrollment is really closely tied to birth rates, and we know that those are falling around the county as well as around the state and nationally as well. I spoke earlier about that teacher shortage and that teacher pipeline. Getting, retaining, attracting, and keeping really high-quality candidates is a challenge for any district. So I know that Waterford is facing that too. And then just recently, legislatively, I've been really involved in looking at what's happening with universal pre-K, getting ahead of that and planning for that, as well as the dyslexia legislation that was just recently passed, and making sure that we have systems in place so that we're ready for that. The superintendent has to be knowledgeable, right? They have to be connected. They have to be an advocate for the district when it comes to legislation. And so I think it's really important, my people skills in forming relationships with elected officials. I've been lucky enough to attend PAC meetings, OCSBA, the Oakland County School Board Association dinners. I've been involved in meeting and talking to elected officials, both at the state level and at the national level. I was lucky enough to be invited to a Chamber of Commerce dinner where I was able to talk closely with Haley Stevens and Alyssa Slotkin and talk about what's important when it comes to education. I subscribe to and read weekly emails when it comes to things regarding legislative action. I keep updated on those. I'm always looking to increase my knowledge, and I think we've got great networks within not only our county, but in the state to really help push those things forward. And I think that being visible and being present and continuing the work that I've been doing when it comes to legislation is going to be really important and critical to continue if I'm fortunate enough to be the superintendent here in Waterford. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. So, to wrap up our interview, we appreciate your interest in becoming our next superintendent here in the Waterford School District. Do you have anything additional to share that we haven't talked about that you'd like to share with the board?
I would just like to invite the board. I know I have references that are part of my application and my resume, but feel free to talk outside of those. Feel free to talk to others. I've been around the county for a very long time, and I'm glad to have you reach out to others that you might know. I really want to thank the board for your time tonight. Just again, in sharing my story, I think Waterford is a really amazing place. It's full of amazing opportunities and possibilities. And I would love to be part of that work. I would love to bring not only my story of how public education was the thing that rescued me, that saved me, that kept me afloat as a child who grew up with some economic hardships. I've lived that firsthand. I know I might not look like it, but I have. I'm eager to work with students and staff and this community in terms of finding pathways to success for all learners, whether you're a high achieving student who's on a pathway to great things, whether you're a student that might be struggling and working with parents who maybe are unsure of what's going to be the future for my student, what's going to be the future for my child. I'm eager to work on that, and I'm eager to create those relationships and form those bonds and and work collaboratively as we move forward for all kids. I just want to thank you again for this opportunity.
We appreciate you being here with us tonight, sharing your story and answering those questions with us. As you know, the board is interviewing a number of candidates, and as we finish conducting those interviews, we will contact you if you are selected as a finalist.
Sure.
So thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your interest very much, so thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
If you would, please, we have those feedback forms. We'd love for you to fill them out. Mr. Bennett has those. Okay, colleagues, as you know, we will be back here tomorrow for our second round of interviews. And seeing no further business this evening, we are adjourned.